question that you heard at the end of the debate there in the Senate. Who are you protecting? What are we hiding here? I have a suspicion that the guy asking the question knew the answer, but of course, he can only go so far within the Senate. And this is a battle. It's a battle between those who believe that the US, obviously, should be run as per the philosophy of the Founding Fathers, and there are those who are working on behalf of the corporations. And I saw somebody had the book earlier, Corporatism. Outstanding book. It's a really excellent book to read. It's a great insight into, effectively, the way that the corporations are being used to effectively establish global control, obviously along with the banks. And although I'm not a great fan of Michael Moore, his latest documentary, which is, I think, called Capitalism, A Love Affair. That's the one, Corporatism. Capitalism, A Love Affair is also an excellent documentary, and in fact it takes into account a lot of the comment and observation from that book. So what are you protecting? What are we hiding here? Well, I said earlier that I would talk about the hidden hierarchy. Here it is. This is the way America is run. Okay? This is the ascendancy. Now, these guys are effectively working on behalf of the inner sanctum. The inner sanctum of the families who have traditionally governed the world. Now, I don't have time this evening to go into that detail, but this is a DVD presentation that I recorded 4 years ago called The Hidden Agenda, where I go into depth about the belief system of those who believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of a planetary fiefdom. The occult belief system, and why it is that they're running very, very scared about the year 2012, and why it is that they're accelerating their agenda, because these guys believe that they have to have total planetary control by the end of 2012. And that their belief system is nothing like anybody else's belief system. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the symbol, the Great Seal on the back of the dollar bill with the separated capstone. Well, that symbolism is very, very important to these people, because the separated capstone represents the knowledge and the wisdom held by the few, never to be shared with the masses. And the few, the inner sanctum, as Dr. John Coleman described it in the Committee of 300, is maybe no more than a dozen people, and they refer to themselves as the Olympians. But then they need their mechanics, they need their strategists and their players. And in fact, in the DVD that will be released in a couple of weeks, which I've recorded with Jim Core, which is called The Final Meltdown, where we actually look at the manipulators through the 20th century and how these guys have effectively created the events that have occurred in the 20th century. And we show that nothing has happened in the 20th century and subsequently the 21st century. Nothing that's happened is random. It has been a script, and humanity has been manipulated by these players to act out this script, and this is actually what's occurring right now. But the mechanics within the US in the ascendancy is Skull and Bones, and certainly Skull and Bones dominates the Council on Foreign Relations. When I say dominates, Council on Foreign Relations has about 3,000 members, and pretty much everybody who is active and is an initiate in Skull and Bones is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. The Council on Foreign Relations is absolutely, although it's not a sort of brotherhood in the way of initiation, but once you are signed up as a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and the way that happens is you're simply invited to attend a meeting. And when you attend a meeting of the Council on Foreign Relations, you sign the documentation, you basically accept their rules and regulations, and from that moment forward they own you. They own you. And I will show you in just a second what happens when you transgress their rules. Skull and Bones also has its players on the Trilateral Commission, which of course was founded by David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski. And Zbigniew Brzezinski is the mentor of Obama. And the moment that Obama threw his hat into the ring as the Democratic presidential candidate, I knew immediately who was going to win the election. Because there was no way that Zbigniew Brzezinski had mentored Obama for 27 years and he wasn't going to become president. coupled with which, of course, the guy that he was running against was John McCain, and this is a classic. This is a classic. You have to go Google this one. John McCain was running as the Republican candidate for the US presidency, and he was at a meeting with a bunch of journalists. It was a dinner, and he was having a Q&A session, and he was asked in the Q&A session what his foreign policy would be towards Iran. And his response was, he said, "You know that old Beach Boys song? Well, my version is bomb, 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 bomb Iran, bomb, 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 bomb Iran." That's the guy who would be leader of the free world? I don't think so. John McCain made George Bush look smart. Skull and Bones, of course, I mean in the Bush administration, because Bush, his daddy and his granddaddy, Prescott Bush, of course Prescott was one of the major financiers of the Third Reich, but the Skull and Bonesmen dominated the White House and the Bush administration, and of course they percolate all through industry. But because Skull and Bones is unique to Yale, then they have to have another organisation which covers effectively all the rest of academia and can pick up the best and the brightest across the rest of the US education system. And that's where Phi Beta Kappa comes in. So it doesn't matter who you identify. If you come up with any name of any player in the US administration, if they went to Yale, it's a pretty good bet they're members of Skull and Bones. And of course you can find the list of Skull and Bones on the web anyway. But if they didn't go to Yale, it's a pretty good bet that they are members of Phi Beta Kappa. Now, ostensibly, Phi Beta Kappa is a male fraternity, but every now and again, they identify females, when they're still at college, who display sufficiently dominant levels of testosterone, and also the socio-psychopathic tendencies that they're going to require, and they invite them into Phi Beta Kappa. So if you Google Hillary Clinton, you will find that she's a member of Phi Beta Kappa, and so is Condoleezza Rice. So you get the idea. And then, as you come down through the ranks, the Shriners' Freemasonry is much more open in the US than it is in Europe. And 32nd degree Freemasons, otherwise known as Shriners, I mean, they wear badges, their belt buckle says they're 32nd degree Freemasons. The Shriners have their weekend conventions, and they're all in hotels wearing their fezzes. And then through the ranks of Freemasonry. And Freemasons are encouraged to go all the way through the system. They have the first 3 degrees of Freemasonry in a local lodge. And then beyond the blue degrees, as it's called, then they're invited to go to State Lodge. And from the moment they're in State Lodge and they're working through the higher degrees, they're effectively in the thrall of the hidden hierarchy. So my supposition is that Bob Kaluza, the guy that was put on the rig to effectively ensure that the BP Deepwater Horizon well B blew out, was a member of Phi Beta Kappa. But even if he was subpoenaed to appear before the Gulf Coast hearing, the reality is that there will be sufficient good old boys on the Gulf Coast hearing to make sure that question's never asked. But that's the way the US functions. Had I not worked in the US for 3.5 years and experienced this firsthand, then I couldn't be explaining this. This is the way in which the Committee of 300 make sure on a global basis that their strategies are perpetrated. You know, of course, many of you will be familiar with the Bilderberger Group. You know, this is the sort of European version, if you like, of the, although it's not just Europeans, but generally the Bilderberger meetings are held in Europe. Not exclusively, but generally. But then the very powerful ones are the Trilateral Commission, founded by Zbigniew Brzezinski and David Rockefeller in 1973, and the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, Council on Foreign Relations, very, very powerful group, sets effectively the policy of the US and ensures that all of the US satellites, and for the US here, read World Bank, all the satellites are effectively in line with their strategy. So let me introduce you to this guy, Matthew Simmons. Because for about 10 years, this guy and I didn't exactly see eye to eye. Mainly because Matthew Simmons, as an investment banker in the oil industry, he was one of the perpetrators of the lie, the myth of peak oil. I mean, if anybody here thinks that the world's going to run out of oil anytime soon, sorry, but it ain't going to happen. I mean, I understand all the reasons why ecologists are desperately hoping the world will run out of oil, but it won't. Okay?
In the Gulf, at least.
It won't run out anywhere, I promise you. It isn't going to run out anywhere. Right? The Russians have a very different philosophy to oil production, and that's why Russia is the largest oil producer on the planet and will probably always be. But if you want to look more into that subject, again, I made a presentation a few years ago called Peak Oil, Myth or Reality. But there's another reason. We have a hydrocarbon-based economy here. Every vehicle that is on the road could, if the motor manufacturers were allowed to apply the technology, every vehicle could return well over 100 miles a gallon. Okay? Just think about the irony of the fact that, you know, we have computer technology, phone technology that advances so rapidly that, you know, the product's basically obsolete within 6 months. And yet we're still reliant for our mode of transportation on a technology that's 140 years old. And just to put that in perspective, Henry Ford was instructed by the Rockefellers to stop building the electric car in 1896. The reason that we have a hydrocarbon-based economy is not just for the well-being of the oil industry. We have an infrastructure that produces 95 million barrels of oil a day, and it has to go somewhere, it has to be sold. But most importantly, in the West, it's tax. It's the most efficient way of governments raising taxation. That's why, you know, I mean, in the average tax in Europe on gasoline is 70% of the price at the pump.
And US dollar value is based on trade.
Well, that's another reason. I mean, it's a petrodollar. It's a global economy based on, and that was another myth as well, that the US was not self-sufficient in oil from 1973. The US could be self-sufficient in oil, but it needs to get dollars, it needs to get petrodollars into the global market so that those global players can buy US products, which is, of course, is mainly armaments. But anyway, this guy was one of the prime movers behind popularising, along with a guy called Mike Rupert, the whole mythology of peak oil. But as the price of oil was rising, and it rose up to $147 a barrel just over 2 years ago in June of 2008, and then at that point, the total percentage of GDP, of global GDP being spent on oil, reached 8%. And it's just too much, it overheats. And that was when the oil price crashed. It crashed down to $35, and then all the oil producing countries basically got together and said, this is too low. You know, we need it to be at around about $75, which is about where it hangs. It moves probably $7 or $8 either side of $75. But this guy realised, I think, at that point, that the whole peak oil mythology really wasn't able to stand up to any scrutiny. And I believe that this guy had a genuine desire to move away from a hydrocarbon economy. So effectively, he was a friend of the oil industry up until June of 2008, but he became an enemy of the oil industry with effect from September of 2008, when he set up a company called the Ocean Energy Institute. And the Ocean Energy Institute had an objective, which was to establish wind farms off the coast of Maine, and Matthew Simmons' goal was to provide all electricity for the state of Maine from offshore wind farms by the year 2020. So at that point, from that point onwards, he was no longer a friend of the oil industry. Now, after the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster, this guy knew the oil industry well enough to recognise the lies and deceit that were being put out by the US government and by BP. And he became a regular pundit on Bloomberg television and C-SPAN and MSNBC, criticising the federal government and criticising BP and exposing the lies. You know, when BP was saying the world's capped, this guy's going, no, it's not. You know, all the evidence is that it's not capped, it's still leaking, etc., etc., etc. So this guy was more and more in demand because of his overt criticism of the US government and of BP. Now, there was one aspect that he was saying during that period that I did disagree with, and that was this. Because he was an advocate of dropping a limited nuclear device down the well and sealing the well with a nuclear explosion. Now, I certainly wouldn't support that. The Russians did it once with a gas well in the 1970s. Why do you think they've never done it since? Yeah, they've still got the problems from it. So that was really the only aspect that I disagreed with. Now, Matthew Simmons also came up with a very, very interesting observation. The date is indelibly printed in my brain because it was the day I actually recorded this presentation, an earlier version of this presentation, for that DVD, BP, Population Reduction at the End of an Age. It was July the 23rd. Now, on July the 23rd, all shipping was removed from the Gulf of Mexico, supposedly because of the imminent arrival of Tropical Storm Bonnie. And Tropical Storm Bonnie was going to create such havoc that all shipping, all the rigs were evacuated, and all the shipping was told to get into harbour or get out the Gulf. Well, this had another effect, because you may remember that up until that point, you could go into the web and you could Google and see the live feed coming from the robotic camera that was on the leaking well. So you could see this well that was gushing, right? And there it was. Well, of course, that shut down on July 23rd because the ships that controlled the camera had to leave. Now, when the cameras came back a few days later, before the ships could get back in position and before the cameras could be lowered to the seabed, BP supposedly dropped in their top hat. This is the piece of kit weighing 400 tons that they'd had built specially to drop over the leaking well and effectively divert all of the leaking oil up their catchment pipes. Nobody ever saw that happen, because somehow BP managed to do that before any ships got back to the Gulf. Well, Matthew Simmons spotted something rather strange. You know, I told you that BP had lost the first well on this location. They'd lost the first well, well A, because they'd been over-aggressive in the drilling. Well, well A is this one, and this is the lambda coordinates of well A. Not very far away. Basically, the rig was in the same position, but I mean, we're drilling down through 5,000 feet of water, and then through 15,000 feet of seabed. So, you know, you can find a new spot to drill in from that. So it wasn't very far away, but this was the lambda coordinates of well A. Now, this is the well that was shut in before they started drilling well B, the well that blew out. So here's well B. Here's well B, and here's the lambda coordinates. Okay? So this is the lambda coordinates that were in the top left-hand corner of the live feed showing on the web up until July 23rd. And supposedly, when the camera started giving a live feed again, being put out on the web, supposedly it was on well B again, because it was being shown as a successful capping, and here's the camera on the successfully capped well. There's only one minor problem, and Matthew Simmons picked it up, and that was that the lambda coordinates had changed and were now here. So the camera that was supposedly showing the same well, the well that had blown out but was now capped and not leaking anymore, wasn't. The camera was on the previous well. And Matthew Simmons went on to Bloomberg Television and told the audience that BP were lying and deceiving the American public. The well was still leaking. The well hadn't been capped, because if it had, they would have had the camera on the correct well and it would have been the correct coordinates. 1 week later, no previous known medical condition, but just like all the people that died from the flesh-eating bacteria who had previous medical conditions, Matthew Simmons, in the autopsy, was diagnosed as having undiagnosed heart disease. Now, if this was a coincidence, you remember I told you that BP owned Alaska, because BP basically had the rights for drilling on the eastern part of the North Slope, and then when they bought up Amoco, they effectively, BP had all of the drilling rights right across the North Slope of Alaska. And of course BP also owned the pipeline, the famous pipeline which they didn't maintain, which leaked all over the place. Well, the senator, the former senator of Alaska was a guy called Ted Stevens. Now he hadn't stood for re-election, he was 86 years of age, he'd had I think 40 years in the Senate. And just a few days before Matthew Simmons unfortunately died in a hot tub, former Senator Ted Stevens announced to the media that he was going to donate all of his Senate papers, all of his personal papers, to the University of Alaska. 24 hours after he made that announcement, BP said, we are going to donate £1 million to ensure that Senator Ted Stevens' papers are properly catalogued. 2 days after Matthew Simmons drowned in his hot tub, Senator Ted Stevens was killed in a plane crash. In fact, this newsletter, which you can find on my website, or if you Google Ian R. Crane newsletters, I have a blog with all the newsletters up anyway. But what I ask in this newsletter, I actually say, you know, have BP got a corporate hit squad on the loose? And if they have, we know who it'll be. It'll be a company that you used to know as Blackwater. But Blackwater have now changed their name to Shay. Except that it's not spelled as you might think. Shay is spelled X-E. But if you Google XE, it's a currency exchange website. Now, recently, Shay was acquired, or a controlling share of Shay was acquired by Monsanto. Corporatism. So what we now have is the corporations, and one of the major biotech corporations. By the way, just an aside, the Iraqi constitution, which Paul Bremner foisted upon the fledgling Iraqi government in 2005, I think it was, Article 81 of the Iraqi constitution specifically prohibits Iraqi farmers from saving their seeds. They have to buy their seeds from Monsanto. And now Monsanto's got its own private army to enforce that. So Matthew Simmons, I believe Matthew Simmons is a hero. Because I believe that Matthew Simmons knew the risks he was taking because he was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. You know, I have no risk because I'm not a member of any fraternity. I haven't taken any oath. So you know, I'm away out of 10 years out, 12 years out of the oil industry, so I'm not exactly a whistleblower per se. But this guy knew, I believe he knew what the risks were. Benazir Bhutto wasn't a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, but you know, Benazir Bhutto was one of the inner sanctum. And Benazir Bhutto was assassinated for revealing in an interview with David Frost that Osama bin Laden had been murdered. And it was an interview that the BBC tried to edit, but so many people had already copied it that they had to put it back in. But David Frost just let that comment go straight over his head. You know, Osama bin Laden had been murdered. She, as a member of the club, had let slip one of their secrets, and she paid the price. And this guy, in my opinion, paid the price. Now, everything that I've said so far is obviously, I mean, is very negative, I know. And it is serious. I mean, don't underestimate the seriousness. I mean, what have I done? I have a 3-month supply of water, of food, because there is the potential risk, not just of this, but as you'll see in a second, of a major meltdown occurring. I mean, we're in a situation right now where we are looking at a manipulated global financial meltdown. I mean, I predicted this, I recorded it in a DVD called Fool Me Once, I spelt it out, I said, this is going to happen. 1 month after I recorded the DVD, the first bank in the UK went to the wall, which was Northern Rock. And in the presentations I've been doing with Jim Call on the final meltdown, we explain how the fractional reserve banking system has effectively been unleashed on an unsuspecting public around the world to deliberately get them into debt. And the World Bank, of course, its whole modus operandi has been to get countries into debt. And a book that I would highly recommend if you want to read a little bit more about that is by a guy called John Perkins. And it's called The Economic Hitman. And he worked with the World Bank for a number of years. And his job was to get developing nations, particularly those with natural resources, into debt. And he knew that if he was unsuccessful in seducing the leaders of those countries to go along with his outrageous infrastructure plans, then they would probably be assassinated, normally by plane crash.
Anthony, what's his name?
It's John Perkins.
John
Perkins. Now, in the run-up to 9/11, in the 6 months prior to 9/11, I was actually researching Mayan mythology and Mayan cosmology in Central America. And although I don't have time to explain the link tonight, I mean, there is no doubt in my mind that there is a very deep correlation between the mythology, the cosmology, the belief systems, the prophecies of the indigenous peoples from all around the world with everything that's occurring right now. And last year, I had booked to spend June of this year with these guys.
The Queros.
The Quero. The Leka. Specifically the Leka, which is a group of the Quero. But the Leka were effectively lost to the world for 400 years. Because they were chased, 500 years, they were chased by the conquistadors. And everybody assumed that they'd been murdered. But because conquistadors returned, but these guys didn't. But they were seeking refuge up at 16,500 feet in the Andes. And in the early 1960s, these guys came out of the mountains, and they were clearly recognizable from their very colourful ponchos and hats. And by the way, the Vatican has a real problem with these people. You know, the only country in the world that has a remote office of the Holy Office, i.e. the modern day version of the Inquisition, is Lima, Peru. And ostensibly it's because of what these guys have to share with the rest of humanity. Anyway, I read a lot about what the anthropologists had been writing about these guys. And I particularly latched on to one anthropologist who I had a lot of time for, is a guy called Alberto Volodo. Anyway, I discovered that Alberto Volodo was organising a trip with these guys in June. And I could go along on this trip without being an acolyte of Alberto, without sort of having pursued any of his courses, which I wasn't about to do. And I was going to go along and literally just sort of basically take a back seat, because I was pretty much an interloper. You know, all the rest of the group had all been pursuing sort of courses that Alberto had set up, etc., but I wasn't. So I thought, well, yeah, I'm just going to go, take a low profile and just see how it unfolds. Well, things changed when on my first night in Peru, I fell down the stairs in Cuzco and broke my ankle. So I went to go to the hospital the following morning, had my ankle put in plaster, and which of course meant that I couldn't go on the long walks into the Andes with the rest of the group. But it was beautiful. It was a beautiful time of year. Temperature was fantastic. So what I would do is go on the coach, and I had the crutches, and I'd walk as far as I could, which was probably, you know, maybe 400 or 500 yards, find a nice quiet spot and sit down. Well, on the first day I did this, I was sitting down on my own for a couple of hours. The group were going to be gone for about 6 hours. But I was sitting down for a couple of hours. Wonderful solitude. And then a couple of these guys come along and sit down with me. Now, the first sort of 30 minutes were a bit difficult because, like I said, you know, I'm English, so I speak one language, so the chance of me speaking Quero was slim to none. You know, these guys spoke Spanish, obviously, and they spoke Quero, but they didn't speak English, and I didn't speak Spanish or Quero, so this was a bit of a problem. So, you know, I thought, oh shit, this isn't really working out quite the way I hoped. Anyway, after 30 minutes, a third member of their group came along, and it was a girl, and I can't pronounce her Quero name, so I called her Thelma. And she spoke English. Not just English, but good English. So she became my translator. Plus, of course, she had her own 2 penneth to chip in because she was a member of the group anyway. So literally, over the next close on 2 weeks, every day for about 3 hours, I had these guys. So I'm not going to share the whole lot with you, I don't have time. But I'm going to share I'm going to paraphrase and share some of the key elements of what these guys were talking about with me. And the reason, I mean, obviously I knew a lot about their prophecy because I'd read it from others, but I wanted to hear it from them. And I said, so why did you come out of the mountains when you did? And they said, because we have to share the prophecy. And I said, and the key prophecy is, and they said 90% of the population must leave. And I said, well, thank you very much. Why did you come out of the mountains to tell us that? I said, you know, if it's a prophecy, why didn't you stay up in the mountains, wait for 90% of the population to leave, and then you could have enjoyed the planet? And they said, no, 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 you don't understand yet. It's a prophecy. Well, of course, eventually we realised, thanks to Thelma, that the word prophecy for these guys means it doesn't have to happen. If it's a prophecy, it's a heads up. If it's a prophecy and it happens and you know about it, it's like more for you. Because you had the opportunity to do something different. And what these guys are saying is that we're raping the planet. We are taking from the planet far more than we need, and nobody knows that better than me. We don't need to be consuming 95 million barrels of hydrocarbons a day. We could exist on a fraction of that, but the infrastructure's in place, therefore it has to be sold, taxation needs to be raped, but we're raping the planet. So these guys, their whole life revolves around their relationship, being in balance with Pachamama, Mother Earth. And anytime they find themselves in a situation where they have abundance, their ceremonies are about returning to Pachamama the excess, what they don't need. It's like, thank you very much, you know, we've taken all we needed, now we're going to give you back everything else. And so we are completely out of balance. And I said, okay, so how is this you know, really going to work? Because I said, you know, there's no question, you know, from my experience, I've been sort of lecturing on these subjects now for nearly 8 years, and I said there's no question that people are starting to wake up. Because when I first started talking on these subjects, if I had more than 5 people in the audience, that was a great night. But people today, I mean, look at, I don't know, 60, 70, 80, whatever. But I mean, people are starting to realise that things are not right. That, you know, basically, we don't need to be living the way we're living. We don't need to be subjected to the abuse that we are getting from those who believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of the planet. So I said, okay, it's happening slowly. And they said, no, 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 it's going to happen very, very quickly. People are going to wake up very, very quickly in the very near future. And those people who are aware now are the advanced party. And their job is going to be to help the people when they wake up in a few years' time. And I said, okay, so how is this mass wake-up going to occur? No, hang on a second. I think we're a bit out of order here. And they said solar storms. Solar storms. And the solar storms, if you go to the NASA website, the solar storms are scheduled to kick in the summer of 2012. And what these guys are saying is that the solar storms will wake up, will reawaken what we have been told is junk DNA. And it will completely change our perspective of reality. It will give us a completely new way of relating to our environment. So what we have right now is we perceive that we have this relationship with a 3D version of reality. We believe that, we've been taught to believe in a Newtonian construct. We have to be able to explain everything and reduce everything to a Newtonian understanding. What these guys are saying is that basically things are going to happen in the very, very near future which will stretch the bounds of our awareness. Now, I know from personal experience and also from the experience of many people around me that many, many people right now are in the process of going through some deep personal trauma. If they're not going through it right now, then they've been through it recently. And if they haven't been through it recently and are not going through it right now, then believe you me, it's about to kick in. Now this personal drama, this personal trauma, it can be relationship issues, it can be financial issues, it can be health issues, whatever. But each of these dramas actually presents us with a tremendous learning opportunity. Because we can either get caught in the drama, we can get sucked up into the drama, or we can step back and look at maybe what it is that we can learn from the drama. You know, maybe what is it about our behaviour that has, or our thinking, or our actions that has contributed to bringing about this drama. And now it's happened, what's the way forward? What's the way through it? Because if we just get sucked into it, and we don't learn from it, then guess what? We're going to do it again. And what these guys, what the Quero are saying, is that everything that's happening right now, everything's happening right now, is giving us an opportunity to prepare for the massive changes that are about to occur. Now, let me just give you an example on the extreme side of this. People who die of a drug overdose are often, well, on their death certificate it says drug overdose. In reality, they don't die from the pharmacology. They die because the drug has opened a portal to an awareness that they are totally unprepared for. And they die of fright. They die of shock, which brings about the coronary. So it's put down as a drug overdose. Now, the pharmacology obviously contributed to the process because the pharmacology opened the consciousness to something they had no preparation for, which brought on the heart attack. And those people, you know, who obviously have had, let's say, more pleasant experiences, either through natural substances or unnatural or whatever, but if they had a more pleasant experiences, then they can perhaps, it's easier to embrace the experience. If you have a negative experience, it's not so easy to embrace. But either way, I mean, you know, I'm not advocating drug use, by the way, it's a dangerous sport. Not everybody survives, as we just said. But each, you know, these aspects occur in our life as opportunities. You know, we only learn, we only grow as individuals when we are in the shit. Because if everything about our life is wonderful, there's no learning. We are existing. We are not living. We are existing. You know, there's a wonderful piece of Zen Tibetan wisdom that says the greatest contribution that any individual can offer for the soul development of another is to be their enemy. And just think about it. You know, because when everything's tickety-boo, when everything's wonderful around us, you know, it's great, but we're not really learning. Now, fortunately, you know, our lives aren't necessarily, hopefully, one continuous drama. You know, we go through drama, trauma, we deal with it, we learn from it, we have a period of respite. Then the next one kicks in, we have a period of respite, then the next one kicks in. This is how we learn. So, to take on board the wisdom of the Quero, consider the possibility that everything that's happening right now is actually providing humanity with a tremendous opportunity. A tremendous evolutionary opportunity, whatever that may bring about, to move to the next level. So at the moment, everything that's occurring is ostensibly individual. All of the pressures appear to be on the individual. But, you know, if my concerns about the Gulf Stream have any foundation, and I believe the Russians certainly believe they do, then those trauma, those dramas, those challenges will move from the personal to the communal to the national. Now, you know, I'm not necessarily suggesting for one moment that, you know, we are going to suffer from crop damage or from, you know, flesh-eating bacteria coming across in the Gulf Stream, because one of the things that I can absolutely categorically tell you from my experiences in the oil industry is that just the same as the body has a tremendous capacity for self-healing, so does the planet. So does the planet. Because what I saw in Prince William Sound in the aftermath of the Exxon Valdez disaster, to this day cannot be explained by oceanographers. What I saw in Kuwait in the aftermath of the fires there and the horrendous oil spillage defies explanation from the geologists. What happened in Prince William Sound was that the ocean currents, Prince William Sound already has a massive tidal race. The difference between high and low tide is like 45 feet. But what happened in Prince William Sound, the tides actually changed to suck the oil out, to get the oil out into the Pacific Ocean, where obviously the ocean resources were much more able to break it down. There's still problems. I mean, even to this day, don't get me wrong, there are still ecological problems in Prince William Sound. But the currents changed to get the majority of the oil out of the Sound and into the ocean. In Kuwait, there was a lot of speculation as to how deep the oil, these massive oil lakes that were covering large tranches of southern Kuwait in particular, there was a lot of speculation as to how much sand was going to have to be removed and filtered to clean the desert again. And what they discovered still can't be explained to this day, but the oil never went below 15 feet. It never penetrated below 15 feet of sand, which still left a hell of a lot of sand to clean up, but it wasn't as much as it might have been. So the Earth has a wonderful capacity for self-healing. So let's work on the basis here that by the time the ocean currents get over to the north of Europe, or by the time the airstream gets across to northern Europe, that whatever toxic mix has been put in there will be dealt with in some way, shape or form by the Earth's natural healing process. But we can't rely on it. So, we do have to think about maybe taking the precautions, and if it does hit, then it's going to challenge us on an individual, family and community basis. But like I said, consider the possibility that what we're being given here is a tremendous opportunity to take the game, if you like, to the next level. So anyway, then I was talking to these guys, and I said, so will everybody have the opportunity? I said, this portal of evolution, I said, will everybody have the same opportunity? And Thelma translated the question, and these two guys just burst out laughing. And I said, why are they laughing? And they said, well, because they know what's really going to happen. And I said, well, what's that? And they said, well, everybody will have the opportunity. They will indeed have the opportunity. But not everybody will take it. And I said, why? And they said, because they will say, oh, I've just got to go back and get my phone. Yeah. Or my wallet. Or my computer. And what they're saying is that we might not need any of that. Even to the extent of what's happening in the financial meltdown, maybe this is actually perfect timing to teach people actually that there are ways to live without a salary. Because maybe at the next level, we don't need money. Or not in the way that we perceive we do today. So everything that appears to be disastrous may actually be a tremendous opportunity. Rudolf Steiner, 100 years ago, in one of his presentations said, he who would create the new must be able to endure the passing of the old in full tranquility. And that I think was extremely prescient, because really what he was saying was that as we go through the dramas and the traumas that provide us with the learning opportunities, we have to learn not to get sucked into them. We have to learn to remove ourselves, become the observer, and deal with it in the tranquility. So I know that what I shared in the first half of the evening was not pleasant. And there's no question that if you go Google, and I encourage you to do so, go Google Gulf Coast disaster, Gulf Coast oil spill, look at the YouTube videos, look at the health issues that these people are suffering from, because none of them have health care. And BP and the federal government are not providing them with the healthcare resources that they need. You will see videos of people where this flesh-eating bacteria is effectively drilling holes into them, and they're just covering it with band-aids because they have no other healthcare available to them. So, we are absolutely not necessarily, in the best of times, but we can make a difference. And making a difference is obviously starting by spreading the awareness, which is exactly what's going on here with the the Varkan group in pulling you guys together, and hopefully you will share the word. Because this awareness, this awakening that's occurring, and we know that these guys know. Zbigniew Brzezinski, on May the 15th this year, in a presentation to the Council on Foreign Relations, said that the biggest stumbling block to the establishment of a one-world government is the rapid political awakening of the masses. This is the same guy who 40 years ago, writing in his book Between Two Ages, The Technotronic Era, which he published in 1970, and in that book he says, the challenge for Western governments in the future will be to keep their people locked into consumerist materialism, preventing them from realizing who they truly are. These guys know there is an awakening going on. They're desperately trying to stop it with chemtrails, with GM foods, with vaccines. They're desperately trying to stop it. But they can't. They can't. And that's why, we are running into the home straight here. And I don't know how it's going to pan out. I'm sure it's not all going to be pleasant, but it is going to be a great opportunity. And I absolutely have the confidence in humanity to cooperate, to work together, because the love and the compassion that we have, which is what differentiates us from these guys who are pushing this agenda through. And ultimately, we will come through. And on that note, I'll close with this quote from Marcus Aurelius, which has had deep meaning for me ever since I first started giving presentations on these subjects. But I think it's even more pertinent now than Marcus Aurelius expressed it nearly 2 millennia ago. What we do in life ripples through eternity. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks very much. Well, just before we open the floor for some questions, and if I can get one of you guys to do the roving mic so that everybody can hear the question. And while you're doing that, let me just give an outrageous plug for my DVDs, because if you think what I've said tonight is useful in any way, or informative in any way, the only way in which I can support my work is, and the only way I will support my work, by the way, is through DVDs. Because although every now and again people actually do offer me financial support, I always reject it. Because I need to do what I do with complete independence. I will not be beholden to anybody. And that's why I always make the statement on my website that the views that I present are based entirely on my own research and my own experience. That's why I don't watch DVDs, why I don't watch television, because I don't want to synthesize other people's research. So hopefully, what you see when you look at my stuff is as original as I can get it anyway. So first question.
Yeah.